With the announcement from the Prime Minister's office that the royal visit is still under consideration, that is the visit by the King, notwithstanding the fact that the King is obviously not well and is being treated for cancer. But that reminded me when the Prime Minister indicated his eagerness in having the royal visit, and other politicians did, it reminded me of the warning I have to occasionally give to members of Australians for constitutional monarchy, and that is, be very careful, never stand between Sydney Republicans particularly, but Republicans in Australia generally, never stand between them and visiting royalty, otherwise you'll be knocked over in the rush. And who better to talk on this and talk on the royal visit than the young ACM convener, Daniel LaHood. Daniel,
Professor,
welcome. And what's your views? Good. And what's your views on the royal visit?
What an enormously honour for Australians to host King Charles III and Queen Camilla, hopefully this coming October. It will mark 70 years since the first reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, and His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, visited Australia in February 1954. I think it's a chance for Australians to really showcase their loyalty and affection to the King and Queen, which Australians so uniquely have.
Daniel, I can remember a few years ago, you came as a schoolboy to the National Conference of ACM and spoke there. You have had a very long attachment to the Crown. What is it that attracts you to the Crown in the constitutional system? You're studying law, you're a legal paralegal, and you obviously see some particular role for the Crown in Australia.
Professor, it's a very interesting question, and I get that question asked quite often, especially coming from a Lebanese background. People often ask me, what's your attachment to our uniquely crowned republic, you could say, in Australia, our constitutional monarchy? I think the overarching answer and the fundamental elements of why I hold that view is the stability that constitutional monarchy has. Well, there's the often said argument, why fix something if it isn't broken? Yes, that's true. But the statistics show constitutional monarchy is the most stable form of government a country can have. Let's look in the Middle East, for example. Lebanon's government at the moment, and has been for many, many, many years, filled with corruption, instability, a government that doesn't really care for her people. Look at Jordan, for instance. With a royal constitutional monarchy, it's a country that's flourishing in comparison to many of the other republics that are, surrounded the Middle East and other countries.
That's very interesting. Sometimes I've spoken to taxi drivers and Uber drivers, and I just tested one from Afghanistan. And I asked him about the history of Afghanistan and the time when Afghanistan was a constitutional monarchy. And I just asked him about that, and he said that was a golden period in Afghan history when we had a king of the constitutional monarchy. And
it's the same as me. It's the same with also people of Greek heritage in Australia. Far too often you hear people of a Greek nationality, or even Greek people themselves, say that the golden years of the Greek and Greece itself was under the rule of King Constantine II.
And you find that in relation to other countries from the Mediterranean. For example, Libya didn't have a great king, but it was certainly a stable period when Libya was a constitutional monarchy. Even Egypt, the king wasn't the most admirable of kings, Farouk, but it was a time when governments changed on the floor of the house. There was a free press. And Cairo and Alexandria were wonderfully civilized cities. There wasn't the chaos that sometimes you find in those places now. Constitutional monarchy, I agree with you, seems to work particularly well. It is, in many ways, an ideal form of government.
A survey was done, Professor, about 2 years ago, just as the breakout at COVID, and they rated nations across the globe that had the overall best health, best GDP growth, the best education, and the best stable government. And funnily enough, those countries were Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and the Netherlands. The common thread between those nations is that they're all constitutional monarchies.
The interesting thing also in relation to the potential royal visit, which is likely because of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa, and I think Mr. Velarde is trying to get the King to come to the King Charles III stakes at Royal Randwick. But when the visit has been mentioned, for example, the premiers of the other states say they want the royal visit too, and Premier Malinauskas of South Australia said he had to add, "I am a Republican, but I do want the King to come to South Australia." What is this strange reference to being a Republican?
Professor, it's a great question. And I often say, and I've heard you say it before as well, Australians at night do not sit up in bed losing sleep over who is their head of state and whether Australia is a constitutional monarchy or a republic. Real Australians, everyday Australians, are losing sleep over putting food on the table, paying the rent, paying the mortgage, and ensuring that they have stable employment. It's tend to be, especially within the Labor Party, I'm not trying to politicise this, but within the Labor Party, you're often seeing that they must always reaffirm that they have the Republican agenda close to their fingers. It's something Australians aren't losing sleep about, Professor.
And I often say, much to the annoyance of my Labor friends, all of the great leaders of the Labor Party were constitutional monarchists. And they say, what about so-and-so?
Right.
I said, he's not a great leader. But if you go
That's
back,
true.
if you go back from before Bob Hawke, Paul Keating, when he was in office, Gough Whitlam stated that he was a constitutional monarchist and in favour of the constitutional monarchy. He changed his view after he lost office, but as did Fraser. Fraser changed his view too, which was...
But Bill Hayden as well, Professor, this is often not referred to, but during the 1999 Constitutional Convention, former Governor General and Cabinet Minister Bill Hayden, a Labor legend, also stated that there was no need for the referendum to go ahead as Australia already had an Australian head of state, the Governor General. And this is an argument that we at ACM have used for many, many years and has been backed by constitutional experts and former justices of the Supreme Court of New South Wales.
Yes.
Something to the dismay of the Labor Party members.
Yes. There's no doubt that we have an Australian as head of state and that as a republic, Australia is a crowned republic. And in fact, the republic which has been proposed from time to time by the so-called Republicans is usually something which is inferior to what we have in terms of the checks and balances on the politicians. It frees politicians from an important check and balance. Every model that they've come up with has been significantly inferior to what we have now.
Yes, it's an excellent point.
And what's your view of, and I think this may well be our final question, what's your view of the politicians who want to have the royal visit, yet they're playing around with the $5 banknote, which really should have, by custom and convention, it should have the portrait of the sovereign on it. And we still have federally, although the government has wiped its hands of having a referendum, we still have an assistant minister for the Republic.
Two very, very important points that you've made. In relation to the $5 bill, it's an absolute disgrace that after 70 years, the Australian Albanese government have decided to wipe the face of Elizabeth II off our notes. An absolute disgrace. So what they're proposing is, instead of the $5 note, which has at one side Queen Elizabeth II, and on the other side, a bird's eye view of Parliament House and the front of Parliament House, they want to keep Parliament House on the $5 note and replace the Queen's head with Indigenous representation. I'm all for Indigenous representation, Professor. That's not an issue. But what we are wanting is, firstly, public consultation on the issue, which has not been done. Again, this was a captain's call by a minister in the Albanese government and the RBA who had their own agenda. Put it to the people. Ask the people the question. My second point is, during the process of converting the currency from the pounds to decimal currency as we have today, the $1 bill had on it for many, many years a portrait of the Queen, and on the other side of the $1 old paper bill, Indigenous representation with Aboriginal artwork. Why can't we go down that path? Why is there always a constant fashionable push by the Labor Party to take steps to remove any symbolic representations of our unique Australian constitutional monarchy? It's very strange.
We saw that, didn't we, in New South Wales when they decided at the time of the coronation that it would be too expensive to put a bit of purple and the King's cipher on the Opera House sales, which are put up there for every other reason.
But why, Professor, only last week was Central Station and the surrounding buildings lit up in purple to support Taylor Swift perform at Sydney Olympic Park. And yet that wasn't too expensive, but it was too expensive to show support and good luck and congratulations to our king. Not the King of the United Kingdom, the King Lear.
Well, I think on that point, you've really emphasized the important aspects of this debate. Daniel Lahoud, thank you so much for your contribution and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Professor. My pleasure. All the best.
Thank you.